Today, we're taking a break from our series on life after death. Next week, we'll jump back into that series by looking at heaven. But today, we're taking a break because it's Mother's Day. And as a pastor, I always find Mother's Day a little tricky. For most, it's a joyful day, but for some, it's a challenging day. It may bring up painful realities in our life. And I've noticed that there is a tendency to idealize or glorify mothers or motherhood on Mother's Day, to paint a picture of the perfect mom. And I just want to share one way that I've seen this. We thank you to our crafty angels for presenting a gift for the mothers. Yes, thank you, crafty angels. And they approached me and said, can you provide a quote to put on our gift for mothers? So I ended up writing what's there. So that's not a quote. But I did an internet search, right? And you guys have probably done this. You know, you can do Mother's Day quotes on the internet. And here are a couple of the most popular quotes I came across. Here's one. The heart of a mother is a deep abyss at the bottom of which you will always find forgiveness. Really? Won't you find resentment at times in a mom's heart? Yeah? Here's another quote. A mother is a person who, seeing there are only 4 pieces of pie for 5 people, promptly announces she never did care for pie. Really? Yes, but isn't it okay for a mom to say, hey, I like pie. Joey, why don't you have an Oreo cookie? Yeah? Sometimes I think we present this picture of moms that can almost make mothers feel stressed. Are we living up to these quotes, to this image on Mother's Day? One of the things I appreciate about Scripture is that it doesn't idealize anyone, including moms. You won't find a perfect mom in the Bible, but you will find mothers who seek to be faithful to God in the midst of life's challenges. And today we're going to look at one of those moms, and her name is Naomi. As Adam Hamilton explains, Naomi lives in Bethlehem 1,100 years before the birth of Christ takes place in that city. And Naomi's name means pleasant or joy. And she's married to a man named Elimelech, whose name means God is my king. Together they have 2 sons and are richly blessed. From what we can gather, they have a stable upper middle class life. Things are good until a recession hits. What we call an economic recession, the Bible calls a famine. And Elimelech realizes, I can't can't graze my herds here any longer, can't grow crops here any longer. We need to move. We can't afford to live here any longer. So the very first thing we learn about Naomi in the book of Ruth is that she faces adversity. And the first kind of adversity she faces is financial loss. And that's significant to me because I think every mother experiences adversity at some point in her life. Amen? To be a mother is to face adversity in many different forms. It may be caring for an infant who cries a lot or won't sleep. It may be needing to rush a child to the ER. It may be trying to figure out how to pay for your son's college tuition or support a daughter in the midst of a divorce. To be a mother is to face adversity. In this way, we can relate to Naomi. So due to financial pressures, Naomi and her family pack up their stuff and they head off to an area called Moab, which is 120 miles southeast of Bethlehem. I actually have a map. I know it's going to be hard for you to see, but Bethlehem is up in the top to the left of the Dead Sea there. And so they travel around that sea and they land there on the bottom right in the region called Moab. It's a 120-mile move that their family makes. Now, The significant thing of Moab is that they are no longer in Judah. They are no longer in Israel. They are outside of a Jewish area. So in going there, Elimelech and Ruth are stepping into a whole new area, new culture, new language, new people. But they do well there until tragedy strikes and Naomi's husband, Elimelech, dies. Now, once again, that means Naomi is facing loss. But in the midst of her loss and her grief, at least she has her 2 sons who she can turn to and rely on. At this time, women didn't own property. They didn't have jobs. So men were their financial security. And she still has her 2 sons. And these 2 sons marry Moabite women, and they settle down in that area. After 10 years, in which neither son has a child, tragedy strikes again. We don't know how, but both of Naomi's sons die. Now, it's one thing to face financial loss, but to face the kind of relational loss that Naomi has faced, that's devastating. She knows what it's like to lose a spouse. And she knows what it's like to lose a son or a daughter. And she is devastated. She's lost her husband. She's lost her sons. She's lost her future. She has nothing. She tells her daughters-in-law, I'm going to go back to Bethlehem. I'm going to go back to my hometown. Hopefully find the support I need there. But I want you to stay. Stay here in Moab. Marry Moabite men and find a new start on life. One of her daughters-in-law says, okay, goodbye. But the other one, Ruth says to Naomi, I am not leaving you. And then Ruth says these words that were read for us this morning that are at times used in weddings. They are such significant words, but in their original context, they are the words of a daughter-in-law to her mother-in-law. Ruth says to Naomi, where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. That's commitment. That is commitment. I will be with you through thick and thin. I'm going to support you no matter what. I'm going to be there for you. As Adam Hamilton points out, Ruth's words and actions here are a beautiful expression of the Hebrew word hesed, which means loving kindness. The Old Testament speaks over and over again of God's hesed, His loving kindness, His faithfulness, His goodness to us. And that is what Ruth demonstrates to Naomi, that kind of love. The New Testament describes that kind of love as agape, the kind of sacrificial love in which we care for and serve another. One of the reasons we celebrate Mother's Day in the church is to express this hesed, this agape love to mothers, to let them know our commitment, our support, our care. It's striking to me that Naomi receives such a beautiful expression of hesed, not from her biological family, but from her daughter-in-law. Not from a fellow Jew, but from a Moabite. Not from someone who is obligated to her, but from someone who freely chooses to bless her, and who does so at significant cost. I mean, when we think about this, think of all that Ruth is giving up when she says to Naomi, I will go with you back to Bethlehem. She's never been there. She's a Moabite. She is walking away from any chance of marrying a Moabite man and having this new start in life. When she leaves with Naomi, she is walking away from any and every dream of what she thought her life would be like. But she goes with her. So Naomi, along with Ruth, goes back to Bethlehem. And she does so as a broken woman. Have you ever gone to a reunion? How many of you have been to a reunion? I'm just curious. All right. Ever gone back to where you're from? Ever gone back to visit your family after you've been gone for years? Probably some of us have. I think all of us, when we go back home in that context, we do not want to go back as failures. But that is exactly how Naomi feels. When Naomi and Ruth show up in Bethlehem, the town is abuzz with the news. Hey, did you hear? Naomi's back. Naomi's back. Yeah, I just saw her. And as soon as Naomi comes into town, imagine she's seeing her high school classmates. She's seeing old neighbors. She's seeing family. And she says to them, no longer call me Naomi. Call me Mara, which means bitter. She tells them, call me Mara, because I left here with so much, and I am coming back here empty-handed. Can you imagine the talk around town? Folks saying, wow, have you seen Naomi? She looks terrible. What happened to her? Naomi left as an upper middle class wife, and she now returns as a widow on welfare. She and Ruth are dirt poor. They returned to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest, and the welfare equivalent of the day was this provision that God had commanded in order to care for the poor. Farmers were not allowed to harvest to the edges of their fields. They had to leave the edges for the poor to come and to glean and to pick. And if grain fell on the ground, they were not allowed to pick it up. They had to leave it there for the poor. So Ruth says to Naomi, her mother-in-law, I'll take care of us. I'll go out into the fields and I'll pick the grain. And that's what she does. She provides for Naomi. She looks out for Naomi. She takes care of Naomi. But the interesting thing about this story is that Naomi also takes care of Ruth. And she does this by playing the matchmaker, by helping Ruth find a husband. You see, Naomi, unlike Ruth, Naomi knows the lay of the land. She knows the culture. She knows the people. And so she gives Ruth dating advice. She helps Ruth understand how to catch a good man in Bethlehem. She gets Ruth set up on eHarmony and explains what to put on her profile. That's what she does. And pretty soon there's an eHarmony match between Ruth and a man named Boaz. And they eventually get married. And they have a baby boy named Obed. Here's what's significant about Obed. Obed grows up and has a son named Jesse. And Jesse has a son named David, as in King David, the great king of Israel, whose royal line is traced directly to Jesus Christ, the Messiah. Isn't that amazing? Ruth, this Moabite woman, comes back to Israel and ends up becoming the great-grandmother of King David. By showing loving kindness to Naomi, Ruth becomes a key figure in God's redemptive history. Ruth becomes part of the messianic line of Jesus himself. It's pretty cool. It's pretty beautiful what God can do. God can take even our adversities, even our losses, and God can bring something good out of them. I want to just read a few verses from the last chapter of Ruth. Here's how the last chapter of Ruth describes what happens when Obed is born. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer." May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. Naomi, who had changed her name to Mara, to bitter, is once again pleasant, is once again Naomi. The adversity she endured is not the end of the story. She is renewed, and she is sustained even in old age, thanks in large part to the love of Ruth. Naomi and Ruth overcome adversity together. And we see in their story a great example of how God sustains us in the midst of adversity. I like how Adam Hamilton puts it. Ruth is God's answer to Naomi's prayers, and Naomi is God's answer to Ruth's prayers. When Naomi is crying out to God, what's going to happen to me? I don't know how I'm going to make it. How am I going to get through this? God is whispering to Ruth, take care of your mother-in-law. Don't leave her. And when Ruth finds herself in Bethlehem, in this foreign land, and imagine her crying out to God, what's going to become of me, a Moabite widow living in Bethlehem? God is whispering to Naomi, help Ruth find a husband. Use your understanding and experiences to serve her. Naomi is an answer to Ruth's prayers, and Ruth is an answer to Naomi's prayers. And as we see throughout the Bible, God most often answers prayers by sending people. You and I are called to be the answer to someone else's prayer. We are called to be the channel through which God sustains another in the midst of adversity. Let us remember that, particularly on this Mother's Day. How might we be the answer to a mother's prayer this week? Each and every one of us will be a Naomi at some point in our life. And each and every one of us will be a Ruth at some point in our life. God sustains us through the gift of each other. God sustains us through the gift of community, through the gift of friendship, through the gift of brothers and sisters in a Christ-centered ohana. That's why friendship is so important. That's why cultivating relationships is so important, and that's why we emphasize small groups in our church. We want you to have a chance to get to know each other, to have fun together, to study and learn together, and to talk about faith together, and to support each other in the peaks and the valleys of life. We want to be Ruth's and Naomi's for each other. Now, since it is Mother's Day and I'm not a mother, I thought it would be good to have a mom share. So I've invited Lana Nesbitt to share with us. I want to invite Lana to come on up. I've asked Lana just to share a little bit of her story, a little bit of the ways that God has sustained her in the midst of adversity. So let's welcome Lana.
Good morning and happy Mother's Day to all you mothers and aunts and cousins and whoever has had a part in a child's life, and I thank you for that. I'm trying to figure out why I'm here, and I think I just figured it out listening to the sermon. Now I know I'm up here. I'm here because I think I'm living proof of what God can do in a broken heart and a broken spirit. And so bear with me. I'm going to try to tell you a little bit of my story. It won't be long because I'm pretty old. I don't want to tell the whole story. My mother, let me take this opportunity to say that my mother, who is 89 years old, her name is Marion, and I'm glad to have this opportunity to pay tribute to her, even though she's not here. She lives in South Dakota in a nursing home. I miss her very much. I try to talk to her once a week. She is a godly woman. Go home, read Proverbs 31. That's my mother. She's a godly woman. She raised me, and I don't remember a time that we didn't hear that Jesus loved us. So I'm blessed to have a mother and my father like that, and I thank God for that. Again, my name, as Tim said, is Lana Nesbitt. My husband Jack and I moved to Kailua a year ago from Alexandria, Virginia. I'm the mother of 3 grown children and 4 wonderful grandchildren. Aren't all grandchildren wonderful? And our oldest child, our son Eric, and his wife and our little granddaughter Arabella, she's 10, they live here in Kailua. Eric is in the Navy, and right now he's stationed at Kaneohe Bay, but he's deployed to Italy. My oldest daughter and her husband live in St. Louis, and our wonderful one and only grandson, Ryan, he's 2. And our youngest daughter, Elisa, just for a little background, she is married and lives in little rural North Carolina by Raleigh, and she has 2 little girls under the age of 2. And I miss them. I miss them very much. But I was trying to figure out, well, what have I got to share? I mean, I'm a mother, yeah, and I've had adversities. But a while back, I was reading my Bible, and there was a devotional guide in the Bible, and it said, our adversities are God's universities. And I got to thinking about that. I thought that is really pretty cool. When I read this quote, I thought, well, what adversities have I faced in my life, and how have these adversities driven me closer to God? You know what? It always drove me closer to God, and God always had what I needed, no matter what the adversity was. He was there in every struggle for me, and he always sent somebody across my path, a Ruth, to help me out. When Pastor Tim called me and asked me to share a little of my story and how God had led me through my adversities, he also told me, well, I'm going to preach on Naomi and Ruth, one of my favorite passages in the Bible. And I went back and I reread the book of Ruth. And I know they use a lot of that passage in weddings, as he said, but it is about friendship, and it's about love, and it's about loyalty. So I began to reflect on my life and how I had been Ruth's, or who had been the Ruths in my family, and was I Naomi? And I saw that I clearly had been a Naomi. Several years ago, I went through a very, very tough time in my life. Again, I was born and raised, lived most of my life in South Dakota. Most of my family's still there. Like Naomi, my life had not turned out as I had always thought it would. And also like Naomi, every aspect of my life had been affected negatively. At that time, I was going through a very painful divorce. My youngest child had left home for college, so I had empty nest. I had no children. I'd been raising children for 25 years, and all of a sudden, gone. I know many of you mothers have had the same identity crisis, like, who am I? And on top of that, due to a lot of circumstances, I was facing serious financial problems. But God was there again. He told me to step out in faith. I took a job in, are you ready for this? Washington, D.C., and I had never met my boss. I did a phone interview. I had never been inside the massive USDA building. I don't know if any of you have been in the USDA building on the National Mall in our capital, but it's massive. There's thousands of people that live there, massive halls. I remember when I walked in, I thought, God, what am I doing here from South Dakota? But it was a little late. I had sold everything. I sold my house and got rid of everything I had, and I came out on a plane with a suitcase. The only person I knew at the time was a cousin who happened to live there. That's the only person I knew in the whole D.C. area, and we weren't close. But you know, he was my first cousin, but I didn't know him very well. Now, understand, when I was in South Dakota, I had been very involved. Before I moved to D.C., I had been very involved in my home church. Anything you can think of, I was involved. It was a wonderful church. But when I moved to D.C., I was spent. I was spiritually, emotionally, financially, and physically spent. But still, I knew that God was leading me and with me all the way, if only I would just trust him. I felt his presence, but as time went on, I became successful and caught up in my new life, and I did not cultivate my spiritual being. I attended church infrequently in Virginia, just to tell my mom I went to church. And she always asked, by the way. It was like, I can't lie to my mom. But still, God was faithful even though I was not. He provided for me, and he continued to bless me. I met my wonderful husband in Virginia. We got married and started our life there, and he became the male version of Ruth to me. And I thank him for that. But now I'm going to fast forward quickly to my story to Kailua. When Jack and I retired and moved here, we left our daughters at home with brand new babies. And even though it was great that our son and his family was here, and I struggled with that decision. Was it the right thing to do? Was it what I wanted? And why, God, am I going to Kailua in Hawaii? I'd been here 3 times. I loved it. I knew I loved it, but I wasn't sure I wanted to leave my girls. And besides, what am I going to do with my life now? I don't have work, and I'm not with the kids. Then I got to thinking, is there some way I could have a positive impact in someone else's life? So in the past year and a half, there have been many adjustments. Retirement, selling our home, storing all our belongings and moving away from our home in Alexandria to this lovely paradise, just to name a few of the adjustments. It's a long way from South Dakota, I will say that. What I would like to talk about, though, is God's constant and abiding love and presence in my life through the dark times and the happy times. God has never failed to provide a Ruth in my life when I needed him or her the most. God's presence has been in my life since the beginning of my earliest memories. After Jack and I moved here last June, my youngest, Lisa, called and said, "Hey, Mom, if you're looking for a church, try Kailua United Methodist." I didn't know if I was looking for a church, but okay. So I attended. I got settled, and I attended, and it filled my soul. Lisa had said, when I attended that summer, I sat in the first service, Mom, and I wept. I felt like I had come home. You should try it. I think you'll like it. So I did. It's important to note that during her years in college, my youngest daughter, it was the time in our family was being split, and she was in college, and she came here. Her brother was here at that time, and so she came and lived with him. And, our family was in crisis, and so she found herself attending this church. I just think that's wonderful of God. Isn't that great? So anyway, after we got settled, I came to the morning worship service, and the service series was on spiritual gifts, and the specific one I remember was finding your sweet spot. Now, I'm a golfer, so, I know what the sweet spot is. I knew right then and there that God led me here to Hawaii for a reason. And you know what it was? He wanted me to get back and listen to his voice and seek him. I knew that God was talking to me, and I made the mistake of telling Tim that, and that's why I'm standing here today. Anyway, the next Sunday I signed up, and the crux of the whole thing is that next Sunday I felt compelled to sign up for a small group, so I opened up the bulletin, I looked in there, and I saw there was a women's group on Wednesday. I never was involved in DC in any group because my excuse was I had to work, but I had no excuse. So I thought, okay, this one looks fine. I signed it up. It happened to be one that Cindy Ellington is leading. And so I signed up and went. And what I found there, first of all from Cindy, was that she embraced me with love and acceptance, and she offered me her friendship, and she welcomed me to this group. And what I found when I got to the group was a room full of Ruths. And they listened to me, and I found out they'd laugh with me, and they'd listen to my crazy thoughts. And then through Cindy, I don't mean to mention names, but I met Gail, another friend. There's another Ruth to me. And I'm just filled with love, and I'm so grateful, and I'm so blessed, and I'm glad that I'm here. The lesson here for me is that God is always there, loves me no matter where I find myself, and he always provides for our needs. I'm living proof of that. On this Mother's Day, I'm not with my mother, and I'm not with my children, and I miss them very much. But I am grateful to be here and to learn to listen to the voice of God again, and to continue my education in God's university. For you mothers and aunts and cousins and sisters that are with your children today, enjoy them and allow them to honor you and show how much they love you. For you others whose children are not here like me, God is faithful, and he knows how much you love and miss them. May he fill all our lives with Ruths and also show us ways to be Ruth to someone. Thank you, and God bless mothers everywhere.